Cursed by the Moon Goddess, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. The Curse Wears My Name. The last man who tried to love her was buried beneath frost-laced earth before the morning sun had even cleared the trees. Aria didn't cry. She hadn't the last time, or the time before. Grief had no room left inside her. Only silence. They'd called him brave, foolish, a warrior with more heart than sense. He had touched her face once, gently, and said her curse wasn't real. Said he'd prove it. The next morning he collapsed in the woods with blood running from his nose and no wound to name. His wolf had howled once before going still. Like the others, he died believing she was worth it. She was not. The snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air bit like it wanted to. Aria watched the villagers from the hill above the graveyard. Even now they avoided looking toward her, as if death clung to her hem like dust. Maybe it did. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, distant and unsettled, restless in the way Elira always was before something changed. Aria didn't want change. She wanted to remain still, forgotten, and untouched. But change didn't ask. The king arrived that night, not with fanfare or torches, but with cold steel and colder eyes. His riders rode silent, armored in dark leathers without house banners. The only sound was the crunch of hooves on frost. She saw them from her window. 7 of them. But one never dismounted. He didn't need to. Kael Draven sat like stone on his warhorse, the reins hanging loose in his gloved hands. Tall, motionless, more myth than man. And he watched the house with the weight of someone who did not expect to be refused. They didn't knock. Not really. A fist against the door once, and when her uncle opened it, the riders entered without a word. She remained upstairs out of sight, but not out of hearing. She heard the name spoken like a verdict. Hers. Aria Morin, the cursed, the blood price. The Lycan King had come to claim her. They said he was cruel, that he'd bathed cities in flame during the first territorial wars, that his wolf, Riven, was more monster than beast, that no woman had ever warmed his bed twice, and those who did once rarely walked straight again. But none of the rumors warned her he would be quiet. He spoke to her for the first time in the dining hall her family never used. Everyone else was gone, dismissed or silenced, and it didn't matter. She stood at the far end of the long table, dressed in black, her hair half bound, her posture deliberately sharp. She wanted to look unapproachable, half feral, already mourning. She expected commands, threats, bargains, and instead he said, "I need a wife, not a lover. You'll be protected, nothing more." It should have relieved her. Instead, it scraped against something raw. She studied him. Pale, ash-blonde hair cropped short at the sides. Eyes that didn't glitter, didn't burn, just stared, measured. Not indifferent. Worse. Interested. Not in her body. Not even her beauty, but in the broken curse that wore her name like a shroud. "I don't consent," she said evenly. I wasn't requesting it." She smiled then, small and bitter. "Then you deserve whatever comes." He said nothing, just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, the faintest trace of a scar along his jawbone catching the candlelight. It wasn't the face of a man ruled by lust or politics. It was a man who had made a decision long before arriving, and intended to see it through. And he would. She felt that certainty drop into her bones like the first snowfall. They left before dawn. No fanfare again. Her belongings were already packed, not by her hand. She didn't ask who had helped. The less she knew, the less she could hold responsible. The ride from her home to Ironfang territory took 3 days. The first night, they didn't speak. The second, she asked him, why her? He didn't answer. The third night, under the thick pines of the northern passes, he finally looked at her. Really looked. Not like prey, not like poison. Like she was a weapon he had chosen and was prepared to pay the cost to wield. "Because you're already a grave," he said quietly. "And I stopped fearing death a long time ago." She didn't speak after that. His wolf did not approach hers. Riven remained tucked deep beneath his skin, silent as a buried blade. But she felt the watching, not hostile, just aware, curious. Illyra shifted inside her with unease. Her wolf had never met another she didn't warn her against. But now, there was only a hush, as if something older, deeper, was listening. By the time they reached the Ironfang stronghold, her body ached from riding and her mind from stillness. Kael dismounted first and turned toward her, offering no hand, no words. Just a look. She followed. The fortress was hewn from dark stone, its walls scarred by weather and war. Soldiers watched from the parapets. Servants flinched when they passed. Her boots echoed against the marble floors of the throne hall that reeked of blood and politics. He didn't present her as bride, didn't summon the court. He simply placed her in a chamber with a locked door and a balcony that overlooked a courtyard of warriors training with wooden spears in the snow. There were no chains, but there didn't need to be. That night, alone in her new prison of silken stone, Aria lit no candles. She sat by the balcony doors, watching his silhouette move below, not as king, not even as beast, just a man too careful to touch her and too bold to stay away. She pressed her fingers to her palm, to the mark that had first burned into her skin on her 13th moon. The moon goddess had carved her fate there, mate and murder, love and loss, bound together by a curse no one survived, and yet, he lived. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind stir the frost off the courtyard tiles, to the faint hum of her wolf beneath the surface, restless again. And she knew, without needing to speak it aloud, this time would be different, and different was dangerous. Chapter 2. The Wolf with No Chain. Kael Draven did not sleep in the same wing as his queen. He didn't visit, didn't summon. For 3 days, Aria wandered the unfamiliar corridors of the Ironfang fortress with no guide but silence. The guards bowed, but not with respect. The servants avoided eye contact. And the walls, gods, the walls whispered. At night she would sit by the fire Kael had not ordered, in a chamber too vast for one person, and watch the flames war against the chill that never quite left the stones. Illyra, her wolf, paced quietly beneath her skin, ears sharp, tail low, not afraid, but unsettled, as if she too were waiting for something. The only proof of her marriage was the silver band around her wrist, too plain to be ceremonial, too tight to be casual. It hadn't been placed there during vows. There'd been no ceremony, no priest, not even a promise. Just the journey, the cold, and Kael's impossible stillness beside her. On the 4th morning, she followed the scent of iron and frost down into the training courtyards. He was there, shirtless, barefoot, surrounded by soldiers who wielded spears with the reverence of scripture. Kael moved among them like a phantom of war, each strike efficient, brutal, and deliberate. There was no performance in it, no flair, just precision, like violence was simply a language he never forgot how to speak. He didn't glance at her, not once, but she felt it, the subtle shift in his shoulders, the way his back straightened, how Riven, the beast within, stirred just enough to remind her he was never far. Aria stood in the archway and watched him finish. Sweat slicked down the lines of his spine, his breath steady even after sparring with 3 warriors in succession. His opponents collapsed in the snow-dusted dirt, panting, bruised, reverent. He dismissed them with a flick of his hand. Only then did he turn. For a breath, the wind forgot to move. His eyes, golden in the gray light, held her without challenge, without question, just observation. And maybe, barely there, something like recognition. Not of who she was, but of what she carried. She didn't look away. That night, dinner was brought to her chamber. Not by a servant, but by Kael himself. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps slow and unhurried. When the door opened, she remained seated by the window back to him, hands folded neatly on her lap. She didn't ask why he came. She only waited. He set the tray down without a word, then crossed the room to stand near the hearth. No closer. No threat. Just presence. She let the silence stretch, sharp as broken glass, before she finally spoke. "You came to collect a queen," she said, "but you don't treat me like one." He didn't answer at first. The firelight painted shadows along his jaw, glinting off the wolf mark that ran, faint and silvery, down his left forearm. She hadn't noticed it before. It pulsed softly with his heartbeat. "I treat you like someone who hasn't decided if she wants to be here," he said at last. "I wasn't given a choice." "That's not the same as deciding." She turned then slowly and met his gaze. "Does it matter? I'm here. I haven't killed you yet. That counts as commitment, doesn't it?" His expression didn't shift, but something in the air did. A current, unseen but unmistakable. "No," he said simply. "It counts as restraint." He left after that, taking only the empty tray and the scent of pine and steel. She should have been relieved. He hadn't touched her, hadn't tried. But the space he left behind felt worse than his presence. Because it wasn't distance he offered, it was patience, and impatience was far more dangerous. The next evening, she ventured into the library. She hadn't expected to find anyone there, but Kael stood at the far end, his back to her, a book in one hand. He read with the stillness of a predator, unmoving, aware, fully present. She didn't announce herself, didn't ask permission. She simply took a book from the shelf, some old volume on lunar myths, and settled by the window. He said nothing, neither did she. But time changed shape in that quiet. Hours slid past in silence, broken only by the occasional turn of a page or the soft crackle of the fire. She forgot what she was reading, forgot to watch him, and when she finally glanced up again, he was already looking. Not staring, not waiting, just watching like he'd been doing so for a while. Elira pressed gently against the inside of her mind, a soft pulse of curiosity. Not warning, not alarm. Something gentler, something unfamiliar. "He does not move like prey," her wolf murmured. "He moves like someone who does not fear becoming hunted." She closed her book without a word and left, pulse steady, hands calm. But her thoughts scattered behind her like fallen leaves. The next night she dreamed of the moon goddess. White-robed and faceless, the goddess stood beneath a bleeding moon and whispered Aria's name like a curse and a promise. "You can't outrun what you are," the voice said, "even the unkillable bleed. And when he does, it will be by your hand." She woke cold. The fire had gone out, but across the room, something stirred. Kael's coat, draped carefully over the back of the chair near her bed. He'd left it there. She rose, fingers grazing the worn leather. It smelled of smoke and frost and something darker. Him. She didn't put it on. She didn't dare. But she didn't return it either. By morning her mark had flared, a soft pulsing heat beneath her skin. Not pain, but recognition. As if the bond, long dormant, had stirred in its sleep. Aria didn't want to know what that meant, but as she watched Kael from the shadows of the corridor that afternoon, something undeniable settled in her chest, low and unwelcome. He was not dying, and she was beginning to wonder what that would cost her. Chapter 3. House of Iron, Heart of Fire. The fortress of Ironfang was carved into the cliffs like a scar, unshifting, brutal, and steeped in old blood. It did not welcome. It endured. Narrow corridors coiled like veins through stone, each hall guarded by the scent of sharpened steel and the faint echo of war still clinging to the bones of its foundations. Aria had grown used to being watched, but not like this. Not with this particular blend of suspicion and fear that followed her footsteps. Servants averted their eyes. Guards stiffened when she passed. Warriors stared too long, but none dared speak. Her presence cracked the rhythm of the keep like frost underfoot in early thaw, barely visible, but spreading. They feared her curse, but more than that, they feared what it meant that Kael Draven had brought her here. He did not explain himself, not to them and not to her. He vanished most mornings before the first bell and returned long after dusk, always silent, always composed. Some nights he returned with fresh bruises along his ribs or a gash just under his collarbone, visible through his torn shirt as he handed it off to the chambermaid with the same detached calm he offered everything else. Aria never asked where he went, but she noticed he no longer avoided her chambers. He didn't stay long. He would stand in the doorway, sometimes with a tray, sometimes with a report she had no reason to read. Other times he came with nothing at all. Just stood, unreadable, letting the silence settle like dust between them before leaving again. She couldn't tell if it was habit or intention, but each time it became harder to ignore the low hum beneath her skin when he was near, the strange quiet her wolf fell into, as if listening through her bones. Lyra had begun to speak more lately, not in words, not always, but in feeling. "He's waiting," she said once when Kael stood beneath the balcony during training. Aria didn't answer, didn't want to name what that meant. One afternoon she wandered farther than she intended, chasing the scent of old parchment down a flight of stairs most had long forgotten. It led her to a small study, walls lined with tomes, the air dry and still, the fireplace unlit. Dust coated the desk. No one had been here in years. Except for the book. It lay open, spine-cracked, yellowed pages turned to a chapter titled, Divine Interference in Blood-Bound Mates. The ink was smudged, but not unreadable. She traced the words with one fingertip, her pulse ticking beneath her skin. The page referenced an older curse, one inflicted by a deity not out of punishment, but control. A goddess angry at rebellion, at love not offered to her. The moon goddess had not cursed Aria out of cruelty. She had done it out of possessiveness. The thought struck deeper than it should have. Aria closed the book slowly, careful not to leave a trace, and turned. Kael stood in the doorway. He didn't speak, but his eyes moved to the book, then to her. The air between them tightened, like a string pulled taut. Aria's throat felt dry. "You knew." His expression didn't shift. "Not everything. Enough." She looked back at the shelf, at the shadows creeping across the stone. "Why bring me here? Why risk your kingdom for someone cursed by a goddess who doesn't forgive?" He stepped into the room, each step deliberate, quiet, final. "I've ruled through fear," he said. "Through blood. Through strategy. Nothing I built has ever asked anything of me I wasn't willing to give. Until you." The fire cracked behind her, though she hadn't lit it. He must have. Or perhaps the room had remembered warmth after so long without it. "I didn't ask for this," she said, not softly. "I know. And I won't be grateful for your mercy. I'm not offering mercy." He stopped just close enough for her to feel the heat of him. "I'm offering you space to decide if you'll burn me, or stand beside me." She hated the way her breath caught, hated that her body betrayed nothing. No trembling, no rush of warmth. Only stillness, as if waiting for something to break. And worse, he didn't move, he didn't reach. He simply let the silence stretch, as if the choice had always been hers. Lyra stirred in the back of her mind, not with warning, but with recognition, as if something in Kael's scent, his nearness, soothed the part of her that had spent years braced for disaster. Later that night, Aria didn't sleep. She walked the halls barefoot, trailing her fingers along the cold stone, listening to the fortress breathe. In the east wing, through a cracked door, she heard Kael's voice. Not speaking, but humming low under his breath. A sound without melody, without rhythm, a private sound. She didn't enter, but she stood there long enough to know she wasn't ready to walk away. The next morning, the council gathered. Aria sat beside Kael for the first time in public. The hall fell into a hush. Whispers trailed behind her like smoke. She wore no crown, no crest, just a dark velvet cloak over simple black. Her posture was unbent, gaze steady. Kael said nothing when she entered, but his eyes tracked her every movement. Lady Sarah, his second-in-command, narrowed her eyes at the Queen and asked a question meant for court ears. "Has she been cleared?" Kael didn't flinch. "She needs no clearing." "She's unbonded," someone muttered. "The curse is mine to bear," Kael said, voice cold enough to hush the room. "Not yours." And that was the end of it. No further protests, no declarations. Just Kael's word, weighted and final. Aria said nothing during the meeting, but afterward, as the council filtered out and the room returned to shadow, she remained seated, staring at the long banners above the hearth. Kael moved beside her but didn't sit. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I did." She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time, wondered if he had always been like this, or if she was seeing something new, something earned. He reached slowly and adjusted the edge of her cloak where it had slipped from her shoulder. His fingers brushed her skin, barely, and the mark beneath it pulsed once, hot and sharp. But he didn't pull away. Neither did she. They remained like that for a moment too long. And when he finally let go, the weight of his touch stayed with her. Not like a wound, like something that might become a promise. Chapter 4. Thorns in the Moonlight. The first time Aria bled in Iron Fang, it was not from battle, nor from accident. It was her own nails, sharp and crescent-shaped, pressed too hard into her palm as she stood alone in the forgotten West Garden, where no roses bloomed and no footsteps dared linger. The frost hadn't yet claimed the stone paths, but the cold had silenced the ivy, coiled it black and brittle along rusted arches and broken statues. This place had once been a sanctuary. Now it was nothing but echoes and thorn-covered iron. And still she came, because it was the only place in the fortress untouched by him. Or so she thought. When she turned, he was already there. Kael stood between two ruined columns, the wind catching the edge of his coat. He didn't speak. He didn't ask what she was doing in a part of the keep left to ruin. His eyes moved to her hand instead, to the blood blooming between her fingers, and something passed through his gaze she couldn't name. She looked away. "It doesn't hurt," she murmured, though she hadn't meant to say it aloud. He crossed the frost-bitten stone slower than usual, as if not to startle her. He stopped just before her, and for a moment did nothing. Then carefully he reached for her hand. She let him. His fingers were bare, warm against her skin. He uncurled hers slowly, as if coaxing a trapped bird from a snare, and used his thumb to wipe away the worst of the blood. The wound was shallow. Still, the touch stole the air from her lungs. Her mark pulsed once beneath her collarbone. Not the burn of rejection, not the warning flare of danger. Something softer. A recognition in her bones, in her wolf, in everything silent between them. Kael did not look at her face. He only pressed her fingers closed again, held them, and said nothing. He left her with a linen cloth tucked in her palm and no explanation. That night Aria dreamt again, not of the moon goddess, but of her wolf, Illyra, standing at the edge of a frozen lake, silent as snow, watching her reflection distort beneath the ice. "He sees through it," the wolf whispered. "Through the curse. Through you." That's impossible, Aria thought. So was surviving your touch, and yet... She woke with her palm still closed around the blood-stained cloth. The change began slowly after that. Kael no longer knocked when he entered the library. He brought no tray, no book, no excuse. Just himself. Some nights he sat across from her and read. Others he stood by the fire and said nothing while she moved through old texts and maps she didn't need to study. But something settled in those silences. Something low and steady, like the rhythm of two heartbeats not yet touching, but slowly beginning to match. She learned things without asking. That he wrote in a leather journal at dawn. That he only drank tea when he couldn't sleep. That he had once tried to play the piano in the war room until the council told him it was unbecoming. He hadn't touched it since. One afternoon he stood beside her at the window that overlooked the training field, arms crossed, gaze distant. Below, the soldiers ran drills, their chants echoing through the cold. "They hate me," she said without emotion. "No," he replied. "They fear what they don't understand. That's not hate. They fear what I might do to you." He didn't argue. She turned her head, let her eyes trace the line of his jaw, the faint scar that disappeared beneath his collar. She didn't ask where it came from, but she wondered what had been taken from him to leave that mark, what he'd lost to wear silence so convincingly. Kael glanced at her as if catching the thought unspoken. "Your wolf," he said. "She speaks to you." "Yes." "What does she say about me?" Aria studied him for a long breath. Then, without softness, "She doesn't know what you are." That earned a flicker, almost a smile, but it never reached his lips. Later in her chamber, she let her hair down and stood at the mirror long after the candles had burned low. The silver mark on her collarbone glowed faintly in the low light. It had grown warmer lately. Not searing, not dangerous. Just present, as if watching. She traced it once with her finger, then turned away. The next day she left the fortress without permission. No escort, no guards. Only her cloak and the vague pull of something she couldn't name. The mountain stretched beyond the keep, cold and unforgiving. She followed a narrow trail that had once been used for messengers during war, now swallowed by time and overgrowth. Elira stirred with unease. "You should have told him. He would have followed. And you don't want to be followed?" "I don't want him to worry." A pause. "You don't want him to care." She didn't answer, but someone had followed her. They came fast, two figures in gray, wolves in their scent but not of Iron Fang. Rogues, or worse. Not wild, not careless, but intentional. One moved in front of her, blocking the path. The other flanked from behind. Aria did not shift, there wasn't time. Her wolf snapped at the edge of her vision. Now. But before she could draw breath to answer, the trees behind her shook. And Kael was there. He didn't shift either, he didn't need to. He moved like stormlight, sudden and precise, and within seconds, both intruders were on the ground. One unconscious, the other groaning, arm bent at the wrong angle. Kael didn't speak to them, didn't threaten, he only looked at them like they weren't worth the breath it would take to speak. Then his gaze turned to her. Not angry, not frightened, but something else, something sharper. When they returned to the fortress, she expected silence, distance, a reprimand. Instead, he followed her into her chamber, closed the door, and stood with his back to it like he didn't trust himself to move. "I won't apologize," she said, "and I'm not asking you to. I needed space. I gave it." And still he hadn't looked at her. She stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Not because she feared him, but because she feared what she would do if he looked at her the way he did in the garden. When he finally did, when their eyes met, her mark burned. Not a curse, an answer. And in that moment she knew. It wasn't that Kael had survived the curse. It was that he'd never believed it belonged to her in the first place. Chapter 5. The Mate Who Refused to Die. The snow came overnight, soft as breath and just as unforgiving. By morning, the courtyards of Iron Fang were whitewashed and silent, the world beyond the walls erased beneath a sheet of ice and silver. Aria woke to the hush of it, the kind of silence that made even her wolf pause, an unnatural stillness, as if the fortress itself were holding its breath. She stood at the balcony long before dawn, bare feet pressed to the chilled stone, eyes tracing the faint tracks that led from the barracks toward the training fields. Kael had already been out there. She knew his gait now, long even strides, deliberate but never cautious. She knew the rhythm of his steps better than she'd ever meant to, knew the way his scent lingered in the halls even after he was gone. In the beginning she'd tried not to notice, and now it was becoming impossible. And she hated the part of herself that waited. A lyra ever quiet stirred beneath her skin, not restless this time, but alert, watching, not for danger, but for him. Aria wrapped herself in her cloak and went down before the sun fully rose. The main courtyard had been cleared, the stone beneath slick with meltwater and grit, but the scent of him still clung to the air. Frost, ash, leather. She followed it. It led to the war room. Kael stood at the window, back straight, hands clasped behind him. The table was covered in maps and sigils, the remains of an unfinished strategy laid out like a game half played. He didn't turn when she entered, and she didn't speak. Instead, she crossed the room and stood beside him, mirroring his posture, shoulder to shoulder, but not touching. They stared out together at the courtyard, at the training soldiers, the low clouds, the bare trees beyond the walls. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It pulsed now, like something alive. She didn't know what made her say it. Maybe the cold, maybe the silence, maybe the way he didn't flinch when she stepped into his shadow, but the words left her before she could recall them. They're starting to say it. His eyes shifted just barely toward her. That I'm not cursed anymore, she added low. Kael didn't answer. And you're still breathing. He turned then slowly until they were facing each other, only inches between them. The light was dim and cold, but there was a warmth in his gaze that didn't belong to fire or flesh. Something steadier. I never believed you were cursed, he said, only marked. And that's better? Yes, because marks fade. Curses don't. She studied him in that quiet, the lines of his face, the stillness of his breath. There was no fear in him. Not for her. Not for what she carried. And maybe that was the most terrifying thing of all. Being seen, fully, and not repelled. Aria stepped back, needing air, space, anything. She returned to her chamber and stayed there until dusk. She lit no candles, ate no food. The cold crept in through the stone, but she didn't move. He was undoing her, and he hadn't even touched her. That night the dreams returned, but it wasn't the moon goddess waiting in the dark, it was Kael. Not him exactly, his wolf. Riven stood at the edge of a frozen river, gold eyes catching moonlight, head bowed. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The presence of him, heavy and waiting, echoed through her bones. Why won't you leave, she thought, the words not angry but aching. Because you've never asked me to. When she woke, her throat was dry and her chest tight. The fire had burned down to embers. She didn't rise. She didn't need to. The door opened before she could even shift the blanket aside. Kael entered. He said nothing. Carried no tray. Wore no armor. Only a dark tunic, dusted with snow. He crossed to the hearth and crouched to feed the fire. The silence was thick, not uncomfortable, but weighted. I can't give you what you want, she said quietly. He didn't look at her. You think I want something? You wouldn't be here if you didn't. The fire caught, casting his features in amber and shadow. His voice, when it came, was calm and low. I want a reason to stay, that's all. She closed her eyes. I could still kill you. You haven't. I might. I know. She hated him for that. His calm, his certainty. The way he accepted her threat like it was an inevitable part of the weather. Like he'd already factored his own death into the price of her presence. He stood, brushing ash from his palms, and turned toward her. Aria looked at him, then really looked. The man who had taken her from her home and placed her in a gilded cage. The king who had stood before his court and claimed her as queen with no crown. The wolf who had never once touched her without permission. Who stood now not as a ruler, or even as a mate, but as a man offering something she hadn't realized she needed. She rose slowly from the bed, the blanket falling away, the chill kissing her bare feet. She walked toward him, with no armor, no distance, nothing but the weight of everything she had not said. She stopped just before him, close enough to feel his breath, to see the tightness in his jaw, to sense the restraint coiled in his muscles. I'm not afraid to die, he said. But I am, she replied, almost a whisper. I'm afraid to live. The distance between them broke like ice underfoot. Kael reached, not fast, not forceful, but deliberate, one hand to her cheek, warm and calloused. Her skin didn't burn, her mark didn't flare, only her breath caught. And then he did nothing, no kiss, no pressure, just his hand against her skin, his eyes on hers, waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. The fire cracked behind them, low and slow. Snow brushed against the balcony doors. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not in warning but in wonder. And when she finally leaned into him, letting her forehead rest against his chest, it wasn't surrender. It was survival, because Kael Draven had not died. And for the first time, Aria allowed herself to hope he wouldn't. Chapter 6. The mark beneath his skin. The snow didn't stop. It fell in thin, steady curtains that blurred the world into softness, white upon gray, smothering the sharp edges of the Iron Fang stronghold until it looked like something dreamt instead of built. In the quiet of that winter siege, something else softened too. Kael no longer knocked. He came to her room without hesitation, never late, never early, as if his presence followed some unspoken rhythm she was only beginning to recognize. He brought books sometimes, maps or news from the war front, though he rarely spoke about the blood or the politics. Not unless she asked. Mostly, he came for the silence. Then she let him. They spent hours in it. Two figures by the fire, reading beneath the hush of falling snow, not speaking, but not alone. Sometimes he sat beside her, close, but never touching. Sometimes she walked the halls and found him already waiting in some quiet corner of the keep, as though he could sense the pull of her restlessness before she even rose. She never told him to leave, and he never asked to stay. It was a kind of tethering, slow and unforced, like vines growing toward light they didn't yet know they needed. The weight of the curse between them had not vanished, but it had shifted. No longer a threat, no longer a warning. It lingered, like memory, like shadow, like the place where a wound had once been. Her wolf still said nothing about him, but that in itself was telling. One night the fire burned low and Kael didn't move to feed it. Aria sat across from him in her chair, legs tucked beneath her, fingers wrapped around a cup gone cold long ago. She'd been watching him longer than she should have, but he hadn't noticed. Or if he had, he didn't mind. She didn't know what made her speak. "Your mark," she said softly, eyes not leaving his. "It's not just a scar, is it?" The pause that followed was not silence, it was restraint. A kind of stillness, more dangerous than anger. He didn't look away. "No. Show me." He didn't hesitate. He unfastened the buttons at his collar, slowly, methodically, until the dark fabric slipped from his shoulder. Beneath it, the mark wound down his chest and along his side, a pale line of ancient silver, not carved but branded. Aria rose without thinking and crossed to him, her hand reaching before her breath had caught up. He didn't flinch when she touched it. The mark was warm and not like skin, like something beneath it, like metal still cooling from the forge. It shimmered faintly, even in the firelight, pulsing with his heartbeat. And she felt something beneath her palm. Recognition. Not from him. From it. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice thin and uneven. "A seal," Kael said quietly. "Placed by the elders, after the war." "For what?" His eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. "To keep my wolf from breaking free." She blinked. "You're strong enough to—" "I'm not." He said it simply, with no arrogance. "But Riven is." Her hand remained against his skin, even though she should have pulled away by now. Her fingers traced the edge of the mark, her thoughts moving too fast to catch. "That's why you don't shift," she said, "why you don't fight as a wolf." Kael nodded once, "Because if I did, I might not return." "And they fear that?" "They should." He said it not like a boast, but a fact. Something proven. Something buried. Aria's breath left her in a slow hush. Her wolf stirred faintly beneath the surface, uneasy. Not out of fear, but awe. This wasn't a man who had resisted her curse by luck or chance. He had lived through something older, darker, something that had tried to split him open and had only half succeeded. He was not unbreakable, and he was already broken, and yet here he was, still steady, still offering her warmth without demand, still alive. Her thumb brushed the base of the mark, and for the first time Kael's breath hitched. Not audibly, not visibly, but she felt it. A slight shift in the air between them, the weight of his restraint. She pulled her hand back, not out of fear, out of something quieter, something like reverence. He watched her cross the room again, returning to her seat by the fire, the cup still cooling in her hands. He buttoned his shirt without comment and sat. And the silence between them resumed, but now it hummed, not with tension and with trust. That night Aria could not sleep. She wandered the empty halls, bare feet silent against the stone, the fortress wrapped in its blanket of snow and shadow. The moon hung low behind clouds, pale and veiled. Somewhere, a distant howl rose, long and low, answered by no one. She found herself in the east wing outside the old solar. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the room was dark, save for a single candle flickering by the hearth. And Kael was there. He sat on the floor beside the unlit piano, one knee drawn up, fingers resting against his temple. He didn't move when she entered, didn't seem surprised. "I used to play," he said without looking up. "When I was a boy. Before the bond. Before the war." Aria stepped inside. "Why did you stop?" "Because it made me feel." She lowered herself to the floor beside him. Her shoulder brushed his, and this time he didn't move away. They sat like that for a long while, the silence more honest than words. No declarations, no confessions. Just the shared truth of two marked creatures side by side, no longer running. And when the candle burned low, Aria did not return to her chamber. She stayed, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because for the first time the mark on her body didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a beginning. Chapter 7. The Broken Moon Pact. The moon was swollen that night, its light distorted by clouds that hung low over the Iron Fang stronghold like a veil of breathless silence. Aria watched it through the tall window of her chamber, her fingers curled loosely around the edge of the sill. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold had only deepened, pressing into the stones like something permanent. Her skin itched with the feeling of change, and not the kind that arrived with fanfare and flames, but the quieter kind, the slow uncoiling of something that had been waiting too long to be named. Kael hadn't visited that evening. She told herself it meant nothing. He had council duties. The border tensions had thickened, rumors spreading of rogue packs gathering near the eastern ravines. She had heard the messengers arrive just past dusk, hooves cracking ice as they galloped into the courtyard. But his absence left an emptiness in the room that the fire could not warm. Her wolf paced beneath her skin, not anxious but uneasy, as though they were standing on the cusp of something they couldn't yet see. Elira had been more active in recent days, ever since the night in the solar when Kael had shared his mark, and Aria had shared her silence in return. Something between them had been sealed that night, not spoken aloud, but felt deep in the place where her wolf and her heart met. And yet, the curse still lingered. She could feel it, dormant, not gone, waiting. The gods did not forgive easily. She left the room just before midnight, not bothering with shoes, letting the cold bite at her skin, a quiet punishment for a desire she could no longer ignore. The hallways were quiet. The fortress slept around her, though the sentries kept their posts at the gates, unmoving shadows in the torchlight. She walked without thinking, following the pull beneath her ribs until she reached the chapel. It had once been a holy place, now it stood in ruin. The doors groaned as they opened, wood swollen and warped by years of disuse. No one came here anymore, not after the moon pact was broken. Inside, the air was colder than the halls. Dust blanketed the floor like snow, and the altar at the far end had long since crumbled, its stones split by time or fury. Aria stepped inside anyway, breath clouding before her, heart beating slower than it should. Elira stirred sharply. "We are not alone." Before she could move, the scent hit her. Not Kael, Not his soldiers. Something older. Feral. Wrong. And then the air changed. She turned, and the moon goddess stood behind her. Not in form, not fully. A vision, half real, shaped from moonlight and shadow. The goddess's face was not hers, but it was familiar, ageless, symmetrical, cruel in the way beauty can be when it expects obedience. "You've gone quiet," the goddess said, though her lips didn't move. Her voice echoed from within Aria's bones. "I expected screams by now." Aria's pulse didn't quicken. She wouldn't give her that. "You lost your claim on me the day you cursed a child for being loved." The goddess smiled without warmth. "I never cursed you. I claimed you. You were mine until you gave yourself to another. That was the pact. You broke it. I was a child. I didn't know the price. You knew enough to beg him to stay." The memory came unbidden. A boy with trembling hands, the first one who had looked at her like she was something worth staying for. He hadn't survived the night. "You made me a weapon," Aria said, voice thin. "And now you're angry I won't aim myself where you want." "You chose him," the goddess whispered, voice sharpening like ice. "The one who was never meant to survive you. And yet he does." Aria took a step forward. The vision flickered. "You can't touch him," she said. "You can't reach him through me anymore." "No," the goddess admitted, "but I can still reach you." The air split with sudden pressure, and pain lanced through her chest, not physical, not wound, but memory. Every moment of Kael's presence, of his steadiness, his refusal to turn away, the nights by the fire, the slow, careful intimacy of silence, the way he never asked her to be anything but what she was, and the fear that if she let herself love him completely, the curse would find a way. "You want him dead," she whispered. The goddess didn't deny it. "He is the end of your silence," the voice echoed. "He is the one who makes you choose." Aria stumbled backward as the light flared, the vision breaking apart like shattered glass, scattering moonlight across the floor. The chapel fell dark again, but something had been left behind, a mark on the altar. Fresh, burned into the stone. A circle split by a single line. The broken bond. She turned and fled. The hall seemed longer on the way back. The torches dimmer, the cold deeper. She didn't knock when she reached Kael's quarters. She didn't think. She opened the door and he was already standing. His shirt was unbuttoned, the scarred seal on his chest still faintly glowing. His eyes found hers instantly. "You saw her," he said. Aria nodded. "I felt it," he added, like the wind shifted inside my ribs. She moved toward him before she could change her mind, her fingers brushing his chest, over the place where the mark pulsed beneath his skin. Her own mark burned in response. Two embers recognizing each other in the dark. "She wants you gone," she said. "And if I let myself feel everything I do, I don't know what that power would do to you." Kael's hand rose, resting lightly on her cheek. He didn't pull her close. He didn't speak in absolutes. Only this. "Then feel it anyway." Her breath caught. "I would rather die as yours," he said, "than live as your regret." The words broke something, and not the curse, and not yet, but the silence. She stepped into him, arms sliding around his waist, her cheek against his chest. His arms closed around her, sure and steady. Not claiming, not binding, just being. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. No longer a vessel for divine punishment. No longer a girl marked for ruin, and just a woman held by the one who had chosen to stay. Even knowing it might end him. Even knowing it might end everything. Chapter 8. The Beast and the Bloodline. Kael lay still beside her, his breath slow and even, his body curled slightly on his side, facing the window. Pale morning light filtered through the snow-covered panes, casting thin gold lines across his bare shoulders. The seal beneath his skin no longer glowed, but it pulsed faintly with each breath, like a second heartbeat. Aria watched him without moving. She hadn't slept, not from fear, not from restlessness, simply because she couldn't make herself look away. He hadn't asked her to stay, but he hadn't needed to. After the vision in the chapel, After the words she'd never thought she'd hear. Feel it anyway. There had been no space left between them. She had moved to him without thought, without caution, and he had caught her with the kind of stillness that felt more intimate than any promise. No bond had been completed, no mark had flared, and yet it had felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Aria shifted onto her back, one arm tucked beneath her head, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling stones. Her mark still hummed beneath her collarbone, but not with the sharp warning it once held. Now, it simply throbbed with awareness, as if it too was waiting. Illyra had said nothing all night, not even in the hours when sleep refused her and Kael's breathing filled the silence like a rhythm too steady to be real. Her wolf had curled into herself deep within, quiet and watchful, like some ancient creature waiting for prophecy to pass by unnoticed. But Aria knew better now. The prophecy wasn't waiting for them to complete a bond. It was waiting for them to choose. Kael stirred beside her, the faint movement breaking the stillness like the first drop of rain before a storm. His eyes opened slowly. They were softer in the morning, gold dulled by sleep, his expression unguarded. His arm stretched across the narrow space between them. But he didn't reach for her. He never did without permission. Still, her body leaned toward his as if drawn. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said without words, but she saw it in him, the careful restraint, the way his fingers curled against the edge of the blanket as if they longed to touch her, but didn't dare, until she crossed the final distance, and she couldn't, not yet. Instead, she rose from the bed and pulled the robe from the chair near the hearth, wrapping it around herself like armor. Kael watched her, but didn't stop her. He simply sat up and leaned his elbows on his knees, head bowed, letting the silence settle again. "You felt it too," she said finally, voice low. He nodded once. "It's changing." "Yes." She walked to the window and pressed her palm to the glass. The snow outside had frozen into glassy drifts. The courtyard looked untouched, the training grounds silent. The fortress was still, as if holding its breath. "It's close, she whispered. Kael rose without sound and moved to stand beside her. His warmth pressed just near enough to feel, but not enough to distract. She could feel his eyes on her, not asking, not judging, simply witnessing. "You think the bond will end me?" he said. Aria nodded. "Or worse. End everything. There's no one left who understands it." She turned her head toward him. "Then we're guessing." Kael didn't flinch. "We're choosing." Outside, clouds gathered at the edges of the mountains. A storm brewing, slow and deliberate, the kind that didn't come to pass over, but to linger. Her wolf stirred again, ears flicking forward, not in alarm but in anticipation. They both felt it, the weight of something about to begin. Later that day, Sarah found her in the council chamber. The woman entered with her usual bluntness. No knock, no hesitation, just boots on stone and sharp eyes that had never quite softened around her. "There's movement," she said, tossing a scroll onto the table. "Where?" "The Eastern Ravine, rogues gathering, not hunting, not attacking. Waiting." "For what? For the snow to thaw, maybe. Or for your death. Hard to tell with rogues." Aria met her gaze. "They think I'll be the death of him." Sarah's mouth tightened. "They think if you bond, the prophecy wakes." "And you?" "I think I've seen the way he looks at you, and if that kills him, it won't be a curse. It'll be a choice." There was nothing Aria could say to that, not because it wasn't true, but because it was. When night fell, Kael came to her room again. He didn't wait to be invited, but he didn't assume. He stood just inside the doorway, his coat still dusted with snow, his hair damp from the cold. She was seated by the fire, a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. They looked at each other, and it was enough. He crossed to her, knelt by the hearth, and without a word, took her hand in his. No sudden flare, no curse, just warmth. And then something broke open. Not outside, not divine, inside her. Her wolf surged forward, not in panic, but in a flood of emotion too long withheld. Illyra didn't speak, but her presence filled Aria's body like fire through veins. She gasped, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of sensation. Kael's skin, his scent, the grounding pull of something ancient pulling them together like gravity made flesh. Kael didn't move, but his eyes darkened, not with fear, with knowing. And then he said it, low and certain. "I felt her, your wolf." "So did I," she whispered. His thumb brushed along her knuckles, "and mine is coming too." Aria blinked once. "The seal? It's weakening." She should have felt dread. Should have pulled away, should have tried to stop it. But all she felt was clarity. Whatever they were heading toward, it wasn't destruction, it was transformation. Not the kind that spared you, the kind that remade you. When for the first time she no longer feared being unmade. Chapter 9. Where wolves dare not tread. They left before dawn. No court farewell. No guard detail. No explanation. Just Kael on horseback. Aria behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist as the Ironfang gates groaned open and the mountains swallowed them whole. The ravines to the east were forbidden for a reason. The snow there didn't melt, even in spring. The air was different, thinner, quieter, wrong in a way that made the hair on her arms rise beneath her cloak. Ancient magic clung to the stone buried too deep for time to erode. Aria had felt it in her dreams for days, that subtle pull toward the edge of the known world. Illyra had felt it too. The curse was stirring. Kael had not spoken when she told him. He only nodded once, went to the stables, and began to saddle a horse. Now they rode in silence, the world narrowing to the crunch of snow beneath hooves, the whisper of wind through trees stripped bare by cold. Aria leaned into Kael's back, her breath slow, her pulse even. Not calm, never that, but something steadier. Like standing inside a storm and realizing, finally, it won't kill you. Not if you stop running from it. They didn't speak for hours. The further they went, the more the forest began to shift. Trees grew twisted, their trunks gnarled like knuckles, clenched in pain. Ice crept in long veins through the roots, shimmering faintly in the dim light. No birds, no animals, just the sound of breath and snow and time. By midday, the path vanished. Kael dismounted and offered his hand without a word. She took it. Together they climbed the narrow ridge, their boots slipping against the frost-covered stone. No words passed between them. They didn't need them. When they reached the summit, the world unfolded beneath them, a vast basin ringed with cliffs, the snow inside untouched. At its center stood a black stone monolith cracked down the middle like a heart split in grief. Symbols etched into its surface shimmered faintly, silver in the cold light. Aria stopped. The breath left her lungs as her mark began to throb beneath her skin, slow and deep, like something ancient waking from sleep. Kael stood beside her, silent. "She brought me here once," Aria whispered, "in a dream. I didn't know it was real." "This place was forbidden long before our time," Kael said, his voice low. "They say it's where the first bond was made, and the first one broken." Illyra stirred sharply in her chest, ears forward, alert. Not afraid, but watchful. The snow around the monolith was undisturbed, but the silence was heavy. Alive. They stepped into it together. The moment Aria's boots touched the stone circle etched into the ground, her knees buckled. The world reeled, not with pain, but with memory. Her wolf howled, not aloud, but through her skin, and a great echo answered. She dropped to her knees, breath catching in her throat. Kael didn't touch her. He knelt at her side and waited. The mark on her collarbone flared, burning not with fire but light, pale and blinding. Her fingers dug into the snow, but it didn't melt. The air thickened, and for a moment, she wasn't sure where her body ended and the magic began. Then Kael reached out, not to pull her up, not to shield her. He offered his palm. Open. Unshaking. Choose. The word wasn't spoken, it didn't need to be. Aria stared at his hand. Her curse had always been about power. The moon goddess hadn't punished her for weakness, but for daring to be loved, for being chosen over divinity. The mark was not a cage, it was a test. And now, standing in the ruins of the first bond, she understood what it meant. She reached out, laid her palm in his, and the world erupted. Not in fire, in wind. It howled through the ravine, lifting snow into the air like wings, battering their clothes, dragging Kael's coat behind him like a banner. He monolith cracked louder, the fissure widening, and from it, light poured. Not gold, not moonlight, but something deeper. Bone white, blood slick, the color of old oaths remembered. Kael didn't flinch. He kept her hand in his, steady. His mark, the seal beneath his skin, began to glow. Bright. Too bright. And then he dropped to one knee, chest heaving, eyes wide. Aria screamed his name, but no sound left her lips. The light hit him full in the chest, burning through fabric, through flesh, straight to the mark. The seal writhed, the silver threads unraveling, dissolving into smoke and ash and heat. He fell, but he didn't die. Aria dropped beside him, cradling his head, hands slipping in the snow now streaked with ash. His breath was shallow, his eyes unfocused, but his wolf, riven, pushed against her through him. She felt it, the beast beneath his skin, not wild, but caged, clawing not in pain, but in release. Let me through, it growled. Aria pressed her forehead to Kael's, her own mark pulsing like a second heartbeat. I'm not afraid. She wasn't sure if she said it aloud, and then it happened. Kael's body arched once violently. His eyes flew open. No longer gold, but silver rimmed with black. A howl tore from his throat, deeper than any wolf's, ancient and raw. The seal shattered, he collapsed, and the world went still. No light. No wind. Just snow. Falling again, soft and slow. Aria sat there holding him, her hand pressed to his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heart return, uneven but strong. He breathed, he lived. The curse had not claimed him. But something had changed. She looked down at her own skin. The mark was gone, not faded. Gone. In its place, a new one, faint and silvery, shaped like an eclipse. She wasn't cursed anymore, but they were no longer just bonded. They were something else, something old, something dangerous. Kael stirred in her arms. His voice was barely more than a whisper. It's done. She nodded, though the wind was already rising again, distant and cold, and the sky above them churned with clouds darker than any storm. The goddess would feel it. The pact was broken, and something far greater had begun. Chapter 10. Cursed no more. The fortress stood in silence when they returned. The snow had deepened during their absence, blanketing the parapets and walkways in a hush so thick it swallowed footsteps. No fanfare greeted them. No soldiers lined the gate. Only a few wary eyes from behind windows and doorways watching with the caution of those who'd sensed something ancient breaking in the dark. They said nothing as they passed. Aria dismounted first, boots pressing into untouched snow like a new path carved through forgotten land. Kael followed, slower than usual, the weight of what had been done still pulling through his limbs like a second gravity. He had not spoken since the moment the light had left them at the altar. Not in words, but everything else, his nearness, the way his eyes searched hers, the touch of his hand against the small of her back, told her enough. Something had broken inside him, and something greater had taken its place. His seal was gone. The ancient binding that had once kept Riven chained beneath his skin had been burned away, and yet the wolf had not taken control. It had risen, yes, howled, roared, surged with the violence of something denied its name for too long. But then it had settled. Because she had called it, because he had let her. And now they walked through Iron Fang not as king and queen, not as curse and survivor, but as something new. Bound by choice. Burned and tempered. Unnamed. Aria's chamber was not cold when they entered. The fire had been lit. Fresh furs laid out at the foot of the bed. Someone, perhaps Sarah, had known they would return, had made ready. But the warmth there wasn't from the hearth. It was from the absence of fear. Kael closed the door behind them with a soft finality, as if shutting the world away, not in defiance, but in reverence. He leaned against it, snow still clinging to the edges of his coat, his breath a slow exhale that misted in the golden light. She watched him from across the room. Neither of them moved quickly. There was no rush left in them now. He unfastened his coat and let it fall, the soft thud of it hitting the floor sounding louder than it should. She moved toward him with bare feet and bare hands, the distance between them shrinking with each silent breath. When she reached him, she didn't touch. Not yet. He looked at her then, not with the guarded gaze he'd worn when they first met, nor the quiet ache of their early nights, nor the wild desperation of the ravine. He looked at her like she was the end of something and the beginning. She reached up, brushing her fingers across the place where the seal had been. His skin there was smooth now, unmarked, but still faintly warm, as if the memory of the magic lingered. His eyes closed under her touch, lashes lowering slowly, a breath catching in his chest that felt too human for a creature with a god's beast under his skin. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. His voice was barely audible. Everything. Her hand moved to his chest, palm flat, her own breath uneven now. She wasn't afraid, not of him, not of what they'd become, only of the depth of this, how quietly it had taken root, how easily it now bloomed. Elara stirred softly, no longer pressing, no longer pacing, just present. For the first time there was no separation between them, no line between Aria and her wolf. The bond was not forced, not flared, just there, whole. Kael's hands came to rest on her waist, his grip steady but reverent, and for the first time since the moment he'd entered her life, she leaned into him with nothing left between them. Their foreheads touched. No heat, no fire, just warmth. And then, without any divine flair or ancient magic, she kissed him. It wasn't desperate, it wasn't rushed, it was slow, measured, the way two creatures might move when they already know the other's rhythm by heart. His mouth against hers was soft at first, almost uncertain, but when her fingers curled at the base of his neck, he deepened it, still gentle, still careful, but fuller now. Like he'd been waiting not for permission, but for clarity. The curse did not rise and the mark did not flare. There was no death, only him, only her. Only the quiet, steady rise of something that felt impossibly like peace. When they parted, Kael's eyes remained closed for a moment longer, like he was memorizing the silence that followed. When he opened them, there was no fear, only the weight of every choice he had made to stand before her now, whole and unchanged. "We're not cursed," Aria said, her voice quiet but certain. "No," Kael replied. "We never were." They didn't sleep that night, not because they couldn't, but because the moment was too full, too present. They sat before the fire with hands laced together, her head resting against his shoulder, his thumb brushing slow, aimless circles into her wrist. Outside, the snow fell quietly. The sky stretched wide and moonless. The wind carried no threat. The goddess did not return. She had made her play and lost, and in the quiet that followed, something else took root. Not a kingdom, not a prophecy, not even a bond, just love, stripped of fear, born not from fate, but choice. And in the heart of a house made of iron, lit by a hearth that once knew no warmth, two wolves lay together. Not as monsters, not as weapons, but as people, alive and together and free.